If you've turned on the news lately, or frankly just doom scrolled for 5 minutes
Yeah.
while waiting for your coffee, you have probably felt it, that creeping sense of chaos.
It is palpable. It feels like the tectonic plates of the world are just, grinding against each other.
It really does. Markets are whipsawing. Political polarization is, well, it's tearing countries apart from the inside. And international relations feel more fragile than they have in decades.
Right.
It is so easy to look at all of this, throw your hands up and say, the world has gone officially crazy. This is random. This is unprecedented.
But here's the thing that we really need to drive home today. It isn't random. And it certainly isn't unprecedented.
Right.
It only feels that way because, none of us were alive 250 years ago.
That is the aha moment we are chasing today. We are stepping back, way back from the daily noise. We aren't looking at this week's election or last month's inflation report. We've taken a massive stack of historical data, research, and analysis to answer one single question. Is there a mechanic to this madness?
And the answer is a resounding yes. We're not looking at history as a timeline today. We're looking at it as a cycle.
A big cycle.
A big cycle that has repeated itself with startling accuracy for the last 500 years.
Before we get into the gears and springs of this machine, let's establish the scope, because we aren't just riffing here. The research we are pulling from today analyzed the rise and fall of the 10 most powerful empires over the last 5 centuries.
Yeah, we're talking about a data set that includes the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, the Spanish, the Germans, the French, the Ottomans, Russia, Japan, India.
And of course,
the big two for our current moment, the United States and China.
and specifically, we're looking at the life cycles of the reserve currencies, the money the world runs on, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, and the US dollar.
And when you overlay the charts of these empires, literally put the graphs on top of each other, it stops looking like history and starts looking like biology.
Oh, it's eerie.
It really is. It's like looking at the heartbeat of an organism. They're born, they grow strong, they peak, they get old and sickly, and then they die.
And the duration is remarkably consistent.
Roughly 250 years for the whole cycle, with maybe a 10 to 20-year transition period between the old boss and the new boss.
And spoiler alert, we're living through one of those transitions right now. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
To understand where we are, we have to understand how you even measure power. Because power sounds vague. It sounds like who has the coolest flags or the biggest army.
That's the common misconception, yeah. People count battleships and think they've measured power. But in this framework, power is a composite of 8 very specific, distinct measures. Think of them as the vital signs of a nation.
Okay, so if you want to know if the empire is healthy or terminal, you check these 8 metrics.
Exactly.
I want to run through these because once you see them, you can't unsee them in the news.
The first one, and it's really the foundation of everything, is education.
Which makes sense. You can't build a dominant empire if your population can't read, write, or do math. You need the brain trust.
Precisely. And education leads directly to the second metric, inventiveness and technology development.
Okay.
If you have the smartest people, you invent the best stuff. The Dutch didn't just stumble into power, they invented better ships that could travel further. The British invented the steam engine.
And that leads to number 3, competitiveness in global markets.
Right.
If you have the best tech, you can make things cheaper and better than anyone else. You become the factory of the world.
Which drives number 4, economic output. Your GDP just explodes. And number 5, share of world trade. You aren't just making stuff, you're moving it.
Wow.
At its peak, the Dutch East India Company was worth more than Apple, Amazon, and Google combined, adjusted for inflation. They just dominated the seas.
Okay, so you're rich, you're smart, and you're trading with everyone. Now you have something to lose.
Exactly. So you build metric number 6, military strength. You need a navy to protect those trade routes. And notice, the military comes after the economic dominance, not before. The trade pays for the guns.
Right, and as you become the center of global trade, you naturally become metric number 7, the financial center. People bring their gold and savings to you because you're the safest, richest place on earth. Amsterdam in the 1600s, London in the 1800s, New York in the 1900s.
Which unlocks the ultimate superpower, metric number 8, reserve currency status.
The Holy Grail.
It is the ultimate privilege. The entire world agrees to save their wealth and conduct their business in your money.
We're going to spend some time on that because the reserve currency is the key to understanding why empires last as long as they do and why they eventually crash. So we have these 8 metrics. When you map them out, they rise and fall in a very specific order.
Yeah, it's a cause and effect sequence. It's not random at all. One leads to the next.
So let's walk through the life of an empire. Section 1. The Ascent. We start in the peace and prosperity phase. A new order has just been established. What's the vibe?
The vibe is hungry. The country is usually emerging from a civil war or a revolution, and there's a strong leader or movement that unifies everyone. The focus is on rebuilding.
Okay.
You see massive investments in education and infrastructure.
So this is the American Dream phase, or the Dutch Golden Age. Hard work pays off. The system feels fair.
And because it feels fair, people are productive. They innovate, they save money, they aren't in debt yet.
Right.
They're producing more than they consume. This creates a massive boom in wealth.
And as we established, that wealth funds the military, which secures the trade routes, which brings in more wealth.
Yeah.
It's a positive feedback loop.
It is. You're winning on every single front.
And eventually you win the currency war. Everyone starts transacting in dollars or pounds or guilders.
And this is where the story shifts. Because once you reach the top, the psychology changes.
This is the top. The trap of success. I kind of think of this like the rich kid syndrome.
Go on.
The generation that built the wealth, they remember the struggle. They remember saving pennies. But their grandkids, they just know the jet ski lifestyle.
That is actually a perfect analogy for the socio-political shift. When an empire has been on top for a few generations, people get used to the boom. They assume prosperity is just a law of nature, not something you have to work for every day.
So they get expensive.
They get expensive and they get lazy. Their labor becomes more costly than the rising rivals, so they lose that competitiveness metric we talked about. Why build it in London when you can build it cheaper in Germany or the US?
Right. But they still want the fancy lifestyle. So how do they pay for it if they aren't producing as much?
They borrow. This is the era of the bubble. Because everyone bets that the good times will keep rolling, leverage explodes, the country starts consuming more than it produces.
And here is where the reserve currency becomes a double-edged sword. Or maybe a trapdoor.
It's the exorbitant privilege. If you are a normal country and you run out of money, you go broke. You'll have to sell assets or starve. But if you have the reserve currency,
you just write an IOU.
you print it.
Let's ground this for the listener. Imagine going to a 5-star restaurant, eating a massive meal, and then paying by writing, "I promise to pay you later," on a napkin.
Right.
And the restaurant accepts it. And then the restaurant uses that napkin to pay their vegetable supplier. That is the privilege of the US dollar, or the British pound in 1910.
That is it, exactly. It allows the dominant empire to delay the consequences of their decline. They can run massive deficits, borrow huge amounts of money, and maintain a military they can't actually afford, all because the world still trusts the napkin.
This brings up the lag effect you mentioned in the research.
Right. This is crucial. A country can be declining in education, trade, and competitiveness for decades before its currency loses status. Decades. The British Empire was technically fading economically by the late 1800s, but the pound sterling remained the king of currencies until after World War II.
It's like a zombie privilege. The body is dead, but the money keeps walking.
And that delay is dangerous because it masks the rot. It lets the bubble get much, much bigger than it naturally should.
Which brings us to the inevitable. The bubble pops. Section 3. The decline.
The bubble bursting is just the trigger. The real issue is what has been happening to the society underneath the surface. Remember, during the top phase, all that financialization made the owners of assets very, very rich.
The stock market went up, real estate went up. If you owned things, you did great. If you worked for a living, your wages probably stagnated.
Exactly. So the wealth gap widens. At the top of every major empire, just before the fall, you see massive wealth inequality. The top 0.1% owns as much as the bottom 90%.
So now the bubble bursts. The economy crashes. The government, trying to save the system, does the only thing it knows how to do.
They print more money.
Of course.
They devalue the currency to pay the debts.
And this is where things get ugly. You have a shrinking economic pie, a massive gap between the rich and the poor, and now inflation is eating everyone's savings. This is the petri dish for internal conflict.
And the research is very clear on this. When you combine severe economic hardship with extreme inequality, you get populism, you get revolution.
And we aren't necessarily talking about guys with pitchforks storming a palace.
Although that does happen.
Though history has plenty of that. We're talking about political polarization.
Right. The population divides into camps. The left wants to redistribute the wealth. The right wants to protect the traditional values and order. They stop seeing each other as opponents and start seeing each other as enemies.
The political center collapses.
It just vanishes.
It sounds incredibly familiar. The system gridlocks. Instead of solving problems, the empire is fighting a civil war. Sometimes a cold civil war, sometimes a hot one.
And while the giant is busy fighting itself, distracted by its own internal chaos, it becomes weak. And that is when the wolves circle.
This is the final phase, the transition, the external conflict. Because while our dominant empire was getting fat, lazy, and fighting over the scraps,
A rival was rising.
let's map this. While the British were struggling with debt and internal issues in the early 20th century, Germany and the U.S. were rising.
Yep.
They were educating their people, they were building new factories, they were taking market share.
And eventually, the rising power bumps into the dominant power. The rising power says, hey, I'm strong now. I want more say in how the world is run. I want my currency to be used. I want control over these trade routes.
And the dominant power says, absolutely not. We set the rules.
This is the Thucydides trap, the friction between the declining hegemon and the rising challenger.
It starts with trade wars.
Then technology wars, then geopolitical skirmishes.
And historically, it often ends in shooting wars.
Sadly, yes. Leading powers rarely step aside gracefully. The transition is almost always violent. The internal conflict weakens the empire, inviting the external challenge. The external war tests the system, and usually the old, indebted, internally divided empire breaks.
And out of the ashes of that war, think World War II, a new winner emerges.
And the winners sit down, like they did at Bretton Woods in 1944, and they write the new rules. They set the new boundaries, they issue the new reserve currency, and the cycle resets to year zero.
And peace and prosperity begin again.
For a while.
It's brutally mechanical. Hard times create strong people.
Strong people create good times.
Good times create weak people.
And weak people create hard times. That old adage sums up 500 years of data perfectly. It's the human element behind the charts.
So we've laid out the map. We see the curve. The big question, the one everyone is screaming at their speakers right now is, where are we?
Well, let's look at the data objectively. We aren't taking sides. We're just reading the vital signs.
If we look at the United States today, debt.
Highest in history relative to GDP.
Wealth gap.
The widest it has been since the 1930s.
Internal conflict and polarization.
I think we can check that box safely. It's higher than at any point since the Civil War era.
And money printing.
Trillions.
So the U.S. is checking almost every box for the decline phase, specifically the later stages of it.
And simultaneously, you look at the challenger. China fits the rising profile. Their share of world trade, their military buildup, their technological advancement, it tracks perfectly with where the U.S. was in 1900 or where the British were in 1850.
It creates this incredibly tense picture. We have a declining power that is internally divided and heavily indebted, facing off against a rising power that is hungry and expanding.
And the friction we feel, the trade bans, the spy balloons, the naval standoffs, that is simply the gears of the cycle grinding against each other.
And remember the lag.
Right. The U.S. dollar is still the reserve currency. That is the one major pillar still holding the roof up. But history tells us that when the internal fighting gets bad enough and the debt gets high enough, investors eventually lose faith.
It's a sobering realization. But the point of this deep dive isn't to tell you to go build a bunker.
No, absolutely not. The point is perspective.
Exactly. When you understand the weather, you don't scream at the rain. You just bring an umbrella.
Knowing where we are in the cycle helps you understand why things are happening. Why is there so much anger? Why is the cost of living exploding? Why is there talk of war? It's not because politicians suddenly became incompetent.
Well, that helps.
That does help. It's because we're in the late stages of a long-term debt cycle.
It's gravity. Empires breathe in and they breathe out.
And transitions, while scary, are also periods of reinvention. The new order that comes after the chaos is usually a time of incredible progress, but we have to get through the transition first.
So I want to leave our listeners with a visual. I want you to imagine that 500-year chart, the wave going up, peaking and crashing down.
It's a powerful image.
Look at the headlines from just this week. The arguments in Congress, the tension in the South China Sea, the central bank interest rate decisions. If you had to take a pin and stick it on that timeline, are we at the peak, enjoying the view? Are we sliding down the slope? Or are we staring right at the cliff edge of the transition?
That is the most important question you can ask yourself today.
Chew on that. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Stay curious.
We'll see you next time.